vision or a new scenario of global food security is not really going to materialize. And this requires a new set of political economy where things are not decided only on the account of the market efficiency or the political muscle of a particular bloc in the north, which actually ends up dictating terms on various issues, including trade, environment, and livelihood. So where to begin? Best way to begin is at the national level. These are all good global talks and sermons, but we cannot, sitting here or sitting in Delhi or sitting in any other smaller place in a developing or developed country, you can't necessarily influence the thinking, the mindset, and the political economy globally. You have to do something at home, and in my opinion, the best way to start is to start from at the national level. You work, penetrate it down within the local communities, learn by doing things about all the things which we talked about, and then be confident about a kind of, some kind of credibility. Be confident about sending out messages globally about what can work, how it can work, and what needs to be changed globally to meet a new vision to work beyond an individual country. I'll end by saying that this kind of thing necessarily would compel us to accept that tinkering at the margin is not going to work. I mean, if you think that you already have we are in a comfort zone with technology, you just tinker at margin with the technology, and that will going to help us produce more food on a sustainable manner. That's not going to work. That is true for every element of the new strategy or solution that I'm talking about. So the number one message is that we just cannot now afford to think about a marginal change at the margin. We really need some fundamental changes, which I call structural changes across different arenas of economic and political life. So we need to restructure the vision of economic growth and the underlying rationale. And food is very, very important when one talks about the economic rationale, to think about the basic entitlement of food. There is a need to, I'm sorry, there is a typo mistake. This is indeed very critical, as both ecology and technology are adaptable to new goals and challenges, which I have already said. So we need to really muster courage to think differently and afresh. The good news is that both the technology and the systems are very, very adaptable and very flexible, and they are dynamic. We can find new solutions because the situations are dynamic, they are not static in any case. This calls for a global consensus on food and ecological security as basic right, which was already talked about in the first presentation, for present and future generation. If the last is something on which there is a consensus, I think a new vision and a new thinking is quite most likely to come through. And I take this opportunity to just convey the basic message that there are ample opportunities, possibilities. The future is certainly not written down as dark and grim, but we have to be able to think differently, we have to be able to think more innovatively, and we have to be able to think globally. Thank you very much.
Dr. Shah, thanks for your comprehensive presentation. I think you really highlight very important issues. One of them is that trade-offs between food production and ecology hinges on carrying capacity of ecosystems, technology, and size of the population. And as you have mentioned, we need to change what is being produced, the way we produce and where we produce. And of course, this will lead to intensify the production and increase the trade. But of course, you mentioned this also increased the significant concerns for ecological security. And you proposed that the paradigm needed to be shifted to enhance carrying capacity of ecosystems, explore and promote alternative technological solutions, and introduce redistributive mechanisms into the growth process, which you frame them as the structural solutions. And then one of the messages that you mentioned was that we need to calibrate global trade framework, somehow internalize the ecological cost in the framework of competitive advantage. I think there will be many questions after completing the three panelists. Now it's my pleasure to invite Dr. Rosemary Portela, Senior Director in Conservation International. She's going to make a presentation on food production dependency and degradation of ecosystem services. Dr. Portela's research focused primarily on nature's provision of ecosystem services and their contribution to human well-being. She leads a team of researchers working on a variety of biophysical and economics modeling techniques to estimate provision, benefits, and values of ecosystem services at multiple scales, working across several conservation international divisions, field offices, and other research partners. She also supports the development of research decision supporting tools designed to enhance mapping of ecosystem services and understanding of their contribution to economies. Yes, Ms. Portela.
Thank you very much, Orson, and thank you, Annette, for the invitation to be here. I'm thrilled. We saw in the previous presentation a very broad overview, very insightful, and I'm very glad they addressed so many issues that I haven't really thought much about since I work at a different scale of assessment. So my presentation will be at a much fine scale, if you will, level, but I will nevertheless focus on the importance of conservation for food security, basically making the point that we need to strike the balance between ecological and in order to achieve food security. So let me start by giving also a big picture in terms of what the big global numbers are, to put things into context. We now have a very serious food security challenge. We have 1 billion people who don't have enough to eat globally. We have another billion whose nutrition is not enough to provide for health productive lives. 98% of those are in developing countries, and 75% of those live in rural areas. They are small-scale farmers, fishermen, pastoralists, which means that those who are most food insecure are also those who are most directly dependent upon the health of nature. Which brings me to the global challenge of the future of food security. We've seen big numbers and we've seen hope, but it is quite an issue of concern when we think that we'll have to increase food production to meet the demand of another 2 billion people who will join us on this planet by 2050. And more than that, we also, how do we meet the demand of a global class of citizens who will demand more food and whose food production is estimated by some to need to increase by 70%. I would very much argue that food and nature are very much intertwined. food depends on nature because health ecosystems are directly or indirectly responsible for some elements of our food security, either directly with the harvest of wild products like fisheries, or indirectly with the provision of ecosystem services that are vital for agricultural production. Think of water, think of soil fertility, pest control, and pollination. For example, pest control in the US alone, which is really quite important to reduce crop damage, is estimated to be something about $13 billion annually. Likewise, pollination is also very important, and it's thought that it's really associated with 1/3 of our global production of crops or actually fruits and vegetables. So, and with fish, for example, another big source of animal protein that is important, globally. About 20% of the people on Earth depend on their protein intake. By another 20%. In small islands or coastal areas, those numbers are much higher. It can reach 8 to 90%. So, health ecosystems are really quite incredibly important. But the other issue is about the impact. The current levels of use are really not sustainable in the long term, so nature could continuously provide for those services that are vital for food production. Think of water, for example. The current levels of freshwater withdrawal are estimated to be somewhere around 70%. Agriculture is also responsible for deforestation, for air and water pollution globally. So we need to think about solutions that are really will help us to be better steward of nature to provide for the long-term security of food production. And that will also allow us to get those in poverty or those who are food insecure to be part of the solution. At Conservation International, we have historically worked we are a 25 years old organization, and we have worked in the last 20 years almost primarily focused on biodiversity conservation. We have gradually changed our mission just because we realized that unless we really underscore and unless humans really appreciate the dependence on nature and the degree of which that our human well-being is connected to nature, we are not to succeed. So we really view the world in which health ecosystems, food production, and human well-being are directly interconnected. Now let me talk about a case study that that is basically how to bring my point of how to bring all of these things down to earth. The big question is, how do we go about and assess really the benefits provided by nature as well as the impact by food production systems? What are the methods? What are the means through which we can really have a better grasp and a better understanding? There are two important initiatives that I'd like to highlight. One is the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity, which really create an enormous interest in how we can go and really look into the value of biodiversity for human economy, and really has also brought the message that we can really work on policies that are inclusive, are recognizant of the value of nature. There are several tools, and the tip is not prescriptive in any means, but there are many ways that we can go about it, including many of the tools in environmental economics. And one of the important tools is natural capital accounting. So natural capital accounting is basically looking into the inputs of nature, both in terms of goods and services, and see their contribution to economic systems. this is important, especially important at the national level. So with national accounting systems, that we can really, instead of just looking in terms of the goods and services that are produced in a country, but also the contribution of nature to the country's economy. And this is what another initiative called WAVES is really pushing forward. The WAVES is Wealth Accounting and Valuation of Ecosystem Services, is a World Bank-led partnership that is being implemented in 5 pilot countries. One of them is Colombia, Costa Rica is also another, Botswana, the Philippines, and Madagascar. In these countries, WAVES is working in a very participatory kind of way with the governments and many stakeholders to find out how we can measure that contribution using appropriate statistics that are compatible with the systems of national accounting. So how do we do? How do we measure ecosystem services? How do we put values on it? This is something we did for the World Bank's request. In one small area in Madagascar, we did what was called a demonstration case study. And that's the focus of my next few slides. In this region in Madagascar, we did biophysical, economic, and policy analysis of key ecosystem services to find out how we could go about measuring that contribution to the local economy and livelihoods of people living in that area. Just a few words on Madagascar. It's an incredible place. It's like basically nowhere on Earth. Madagascar is an island, and it's the fourth largest island on Earth, with less than half a percentage of terrestrial land, global terrestrial land, but with an incredible biodiversity. It harbors about 5% of the biodiversity, which is mostly endemic, which means it's found nowhere else on Earth. It is also one of the world's 10 most threatened hotspots, which means that it's under a lot of pressure from deforestation, which is in Madagascar driven a result of many different drivers, but certainly agriculture is probably the most prominent driver of deforestation, and agriculture in Madagascar really is implemented to meet the needs of a very fast growing population in the country. Agriculture in Madagascar is primarily done by irrigation, small plots irrigation with gravity-fed water, and it's 70% of it are small-scale initiatives, something like 200 hectares to 10 hectares, family plots as small as 10 hectares. And it consumes a lot of water, naturally. This is rice paddying that I'm talking about. Most of the irrigation in the country, something like 98% of irrigation in Madagascar is primarily for rice production. So the withdrawal levels of fresh water are just absolutely incredible. Most of the water used in the country is primarily for irrigation. It also causes a lot of problems associated with erosion and sediment and the water bodies and in the land of Madagascar, something like they call lavaca and sheet erosion, which are enormous and really have an impact on freshwater systems, coastal areas, but just as importantly on the livelihoods of people, because it causes a lot of rejection of profits, and in terms of the cost of repairing, the losses of production, etc. So what we did is looked into a small area in Madagascar in a place called Akanihani, the Amana forest corridor, which is a fairly large, narrow area in the eastern part of the country. You can see that part here in green in the map. It is a nearly designated protected area that is actually composed of a mosaic of land uses that varies from villages, agriculture, forest cover, as well as 5 protected areas and reserves that are managed by the government and some by the community. It harbors thousands of species of plants, so it's an incredibly important area, and many mammals and birds, including several species of lemurs, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. So what we did is we did a fairly sophisticated modeling experiment looking into 2 comparative sites in Madagascar, in that region. One that resembled more or less the natural features of Cass, which was primarily forested area, and one that was primarily deforested, devoted to agriculture. So that would allow us to, using our modeling techniques, to see not only how much the services flows within those 2 sites, but also the beneficiaries, how much was reaching and how much was meeting the demands of the people living and working in the region. This is somewhat unique in terms of ecosystem services, because when we do normally the standard models for ecosystem services,